The title of my research is Paradise Lost in Demian and BTS Wings Growing Through Lost Innocence. As a South Korean musical group, K-pop group, BTS delivers a message of self-discovery through their short film series Wings. Through Wings, BTS depicts the hard journey to discover oneself in a precarious world established by the parental and adult generations. Just like the title of the film, Wings, which symbolizes angels and heavenly beings, BTS uses lots of themes and concepts that can be paralleled with those in Milton's Paradise Lost. This paper will demonstrate how both Paradise Lost and Wings contain an ironic interpretation of the loss of innocence. For example, Milton depicts how the lost innocence of Adam and Eve does not lead to an absolute downfall, but becomes a source for experiencing God's grace through the coming of Son of God. With such an paradoxical approach to one's failure to keep innocence, BTS also emphasizes how the loss of innocence in one's own decision-making process ultimately becomes the source for them to find their identities as grown-ups. Considering the social development of Adam and Eve in Paradise Lost, the inner struggles of them that Milton depicts in Paradise Lost are clearly associated with the theme of BTS's Wings, a child challenging oneself to transgress one's original world to the new world as a grown being. About this state of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, in the social psychology of Adam and Eve, cats depicted as their metamorphosis into mature social beings. Interestingly, the title of BTS's Wings also can be interpreted as the metamorphosis of a child. This is related to how a bird goes through a metamorphosis in the egg and breaks the shell and flies out of it with wings. The wings symbolize how a child comes out of the egg to challenge oneself, to fly to the new world for the journey to find one's true color and identity. Considering how Wings is inspired by Hermann Hesse's Demian, a bird's metamorphosis is clearly related to the symbolism of a child's development. In Demian, it says, the bird is struggling out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever wants to be born must first destroy a world. The bird is flying to God. The name of the God is called Abraxas. Just like how Adam and Eve go through the metamorphosis through moving from the Garden of Eden to the world after the fall, BTS depicts youth facing the world to become an adult as a metamorphosis of a child. In BTS's Wings short film 7 Awake, Seokjin, the oldest of the members, symbolizes the grown-up. When he gets to the door which has scratches on it opens by itself. The scratches symbolize the process of a bird's hatching, how a bird beats the shell of the egg with its beak to break it and to hatch out of it. The background music says, I want to stay more and dream more, but it's time to leave. This lyric shows how a child's development does not depend on someone else's enforcement, but relies on a child's free will to tap the shell by oneself. The song emphasizes the meaning of time, which demonstrates all youth will face their time to hatch. Followed by these two scenes, Seokjin leaves the light behind and walks to the darkness, the world outside of warmth and comfort. This shows the clear parallels with Paradise Lost when Adam and Eve leave Eden in book 12. Leaving paradise behind in this book 12, Adam and Eve took their solitary way. This also symbolizes how the transition of Adam and Eve to the world of unknown requires their solitary way. This is related to BTS' view of a child growth and development. It does not happen through any power or authority outside of the child, but it has to be a solitary way, which means one's own decision and determination matter. At the end of the hallway, Seokjin faces a big bird that represents his full-grown self. Shown by this, BTS also strongly highlights free will that Milton emphasizes in Paradise Lost. Influenced by Demian for this film, the wallpaper that has a bird frame that Seokjin looks at has Abraxas as a pattern. Abraxas is one of the Egyptian gods and possesses truth and lying, good and evil, light and darkness in the same word and in the same act. This depicts that all the choice makings that transcend the boundaries of good and evil, right and wrong, and light and darkness become sources for young people to discover themselves. This is related to Adam and Eve's leaving Paradise Lost for the world. Though they once belonged to Eden, where the heavenly system was all that they needed, they are leaving that frame to be exposed to use their free will in making decisions. Milton clearly shows this in Book 12, their place of rest and providence their guide. Milton clearly says how they face the world that makes one wonder where to choose their place of rest. This shows how they now have choices to make, leaving their familiar frame of paradise. Milton shows how this journey out of the Garden of Eden into the world maximizes the use of their free will as more separated and independent beings from paradise. Another parallel that can be found in BTS's Wings and Paradise Lost is using dark imaginary to demonstrate the opposite world of paradise. Two opposite worlds appear in Wings' short film Begin through how they use the color contrast, black and white. The music film begins by showing the title Begin in black with a white background behind it. This black and white color contrast is also shown through the Wings album cover. After showing this letter Begin, the film starts with Jungkook, the youngest member of BTS, sleeps on his white bed with his white shirt on in a dark room. As the youngest of the members, he symbolizes youth that has not been through the process to be a grown-up yet. To symbolize that a child will go through the process to be a bird, the film shows how he has a black bird pattern on the left chest side of the white shirt. In a dream, with a loud sound that reminiscent of a car accident and the breaking of windows, he sees the image of a bird with a black background behind it. The sound of the car accident is notably by the loud sequel of the car's brakes. This means Jungkook, who now belongs to the world of comfort and familiarity on the white bed, will no longer be able to dwell there and now has to go through the process to face the real world outside of that comfort place. After he wakes up, the film says, because the dawn right before the sun rises is the darkest. After that saying, Jungkook looks at a portrait of himself, painted with a black and white contrast, and finds a red stain on his left eye. The red stain symbolizes the intervention of another element that cannot be defined by his perspective of seeing the world as a child. This red color also symbolizes temptation that leads him to be away from the world that once he belonged to. This idea can be supported by his white bed moves away and leaves him alone in the center of the dark room when he stares at the red spot. In Paradise Book 2, Milton shows how red right hand symbolizes the vengeance of God. In the same way, when Jungkook finds a red spot on his left eye in the painting, the world of paradise moves away from him. Being left alone in the darkness, after this happened, Wings shows how it suddenly rains, just like the opposite imagery of heaven, which is symbolized by light and the sun. When Jungkook is left alone in the dark, rainy room, a bigger painting of himself moves toward him. The painting looks straight at him. Now his painting has various colors, mostly around his hair and eyes, and his chest where the bird was, on his white shirt. When Jungkook looks at it, he feels afraid and uncomfortable to look at it and begins to cry. The tears from his eyes also flows from the painting's eyes as well and make the color spread all over his face. This shows how his world is no longer defined by a perspective of black and white. His tears, which mean the pain of growing, ultimately lead him to find the true colors inside of himself. Even though Jungkook's world of familiarity and comfort falls apart with a red stain in his eye that symbolizes the fall, this leads him to experience the solitary steps to be a fully grown up, similar to how Adam and Eve take their solitary path after the fall, experiencing the vengeance of God that is presented by red right arm. Through this terrible process of challenging himself to walk outside of the shell, the childhood world that he once belonged to, he finally has real wings on his back. This shows how his metamorphosis to become a bird is achieved through his fall, failures, and tears, the lost innocence. This transition from one world to the other also appears in another part of the wings. In the film, Jimin sits on one of the white beds in a small room covered by white curtains. The white room seems filled with a light blue color, which symbolizes the sky. While full of white colors in the film, only his pants and shoes are in black. Considering how his legs or feet symbolize his strength to move, this indicates his use of free will. This represents how he is tempted to move in an opposite way from where he belongs, as if he trying to reach to the other side of his world. He stretches out his left hand to the other bed. After this scene, he says, "Tell me the way. Please stop me. Please let me breathe." This shows how Jimin is tempted to explore the way of the new world. He says how strong that temptation is by asking for help to stop him and let him breathe. This parallels what happens to Eve after she encounters Satan, disguised as the snake when she sees and hears about the forbidden fruit. After this scene, Jimin holds a fruit, which shows a clear similarity with Paradise Lost, and finally eats the red fruit, which again symbolizes the fall and vengeance of God in his hand. In Wing's short film 7 Awake, BTS shows more scenes related to Eve. A scene that Seokjin, the oldest among the members, looks at himself in the water before he walks to a bird's painting. This kind of depiction on self-awareness as a child and temptations of self-obsession clearly reminds us of how Milton describes Eve, who looks at the reflection of herself in Eden and goes through the process of being aware of herself in Paradise Lost. Seokjin stares at the water reflection of himself. Attracted by it, he tries to touch it with his finger. When he touches the water, thunder rumbles behind him, and he becomes alarmed. Seokjin breaks away from looking at the reflection right away and looks back behind him. This has a strong parallel with Eve's temptation that came from self-love when she looks at the water in Book 4. In these lines, it depicts how Eve first sees her image reflected in a body of water. She feels pleased. She returned to see her reflection again. Full of sympathy and love, she stares at it until God calls to her. About this, Zimmerman, a psychologist, notes that in a world where outside and inside are still one, indistinguishable and undifferentiated, Eve is strikingly unaware of the fact that the reflection is the water is her own. This shows how Eve strongly symbolizes a child that is in the middle of the process to find her true self. Thus, Eve's reaction to her reflection in the water parallels BTS' depiction about the stages of youth. Adding more upon this idea, in Milton's studies, Norford notes that Eve still lives in the oceanic womb-like state, in which one does not distinguish between self and world. This clearly reveals how the water reflection seen both in Paradise Lost and Wings demonstrates a young child who is not fully aware of oneself yet. After this scene, the film says, "We cried a lot and laughed a lot, but it was all so beautiful." Instead of dividing moments of youth into good and evil, right and wrong, and black and white, BTS emphasizes how all the trials, pains, and struggles as youth turn out to be all so beautiful as resources to grow. With this message, the film ends by showing 6 photos on the floor: a boy standing alone with a long shadow behind him, a child and a mother hugging each other, a red apple on the ground, a brown piano, a bird's frame, and a closed door. So this is the line from the song, and this is the picture. By showing these pictures one by one, BTS paints how all the moments are so beautiful, from moments that a young boy was under the care of his parents, times of being tempted and yielding to it, and moments of dreaming to be a bird. With this kind of collective thoughts about every moment, BTS also highlights youth collective efforts for companionship to each other as well. This also can be found in the last 2 lines of Paradise Lost. They hand in hand with wandering steps and slow. Through Eden took their solitary way. Milton concludes Paradise Lost by showing how Adam and Eve hold their hands and leave Paradise Lost. Their transition from the familiar world to the new world happens not by a one-sided effort, but by teamwork. Through using these concepts from Paradise Lost, BTS brings attention to the hardships of a South Korean youth. Parental or adult expectations towards youth bring a great amount of stress to the Korean student population. Tom Owenby, an English teacher who has worked in Seoul, talks about Korean students. It's not about finding your own path or your own self, as it is about doing better than those around you. It is in many ways a zero-sum game for South Korean students. Examination results determine which universities students can get into, and as there are a small number of colleges considered as prestigious by prospective employers, the adult generation, the competition is life-consuming for them. As youth grow into adults in South Korea, they typically lose the opportunity to, as ONB mentions, find their own identities. Through Wings, BTS uses a similar message about how mistakes let youth experience grace. In depicting grace, Milton shows the fool ultimately become the graceful resource for the Son of God to save. About this, the angel Michael says in Book 12, "From God and over wrath grace shall abound." Milton reveals how evil turned to good. He highlights how wrath becomes the source from which grace shall abound. Even though Adam and Eve lose innocence by eating the fruit and get cast out from Eden, the fall is considered not only as a misery, but also as a source that much more goodwill to men from God, which means it opens the door for the grace to abound through the coming of the deliverer. Milton exposes their ironic concept of how Adam and Eve's fall eventually leads to the good fortune of all mankind. About this, in Milton and Paradox of the Fortunate Fall, Lovejoy notes that this, though for the greater part a most unhappy story, concludes with a prediction of the second coming and the final judgment when Christ shall revert. Such irony is beautifully used in BTS Wings. BTS Wings gives a new lens to interpret Paradise Lost, how it can be considered not only a source to explore a biblical concept, but also a piece to demonstrate youth self-discovery through lost innocence. BTS encourages youth to challenge themselves by passing on from innocence in the harsh South Korean society required by the parental and adult generation. This impact now inspires young people worldwide to challenge themselves for their self-discovery, to find their true colors outside of black and white, against the social pressure from the adult and parental generations. Thank you so much.